Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Scott. That was a wonderful introduction. It's very unusual to hear yourself spoken about in those terms. Right, I am James McKemey, as announced. I'm here from PodPoint to talk about charging up the road to 2030. In the news at the moment, there's a lot of news about 2030 deadline being under pressure. I just want to talk about the few factors that go into that. Probably your first question is, who's PodPoint, if you haven't heard of us? So we're effectively a charging infrastructure firm. We very much believe we're pursuing our mission that we should put a charge point or a pod point everywhere that you park, because we believe travel shouldn't damage the earth. In order to make that transition happen, we're helping people adopt clean transport in their everyday lives. And to do that, we're building our network of connected smart EV charge points across the UK. A little bit of vanity, we've delivered over 745 million miles of electric motoring, delivered over 211,000 charge points in the UK, and we have a public network in the UK of over 9,200 bays. And there's a bunch of companies we work with down the bottom that I won't bore you with at the minute. Right, on to the presentation. So first thing you'll note is the 2030 deadline is actually two deadlines. It's 2030 and it's 2035, and I want to talk about what they mean for drivers. So, a lot of chat in the press about this at the moment. So, what the 2030 and 35 deadlines do mean. 2030, all new cars must have significant zero emission capability. That's SZEC, okay? So you can't buy a petrol car, effectively. 2035, all new cars must be zero-emission vehicles. So essentially, we go full battery electric or hydrogen from 2035. What does SZEC actually mean? Well, we don't know. That's to be determined. We're going to have a government consultation on that in due course. I would like it to be, say, a plug-in hybrid vehicle with a range of about 70 miles, which seems logical to me. But it may well end up being just plain hybrid. It depends how we do with EV uptake. Now, what does it not mean, or what do these deadlines not mean? So in terms of electric vehicles on the road, there's a lot of people saying we're not ready to all be driving electric vehicles in 2030. According to the sort of core, the key stats on this, so Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, National Grid, government's net zero strategy, between 20 and 30% of vehicles on the road in 2030 will be full battery electric. Okay, we're about 2-3% at the minute. Okay. 70 to 80% of cars on the road in 2030 will be petrol or diesel. No one is coming for your petrol car. Okay, Daily Mail comments, it's okay, you can keep driving your diesel, it's absolutely fine, but the new cars start transitioning. And finally, those who say, oh, well, electric vehicles, it's a transition, I'm going to wait for hydrogen. No one is stopping hydrogen. Hydrogen, you can go get a hydrogen car now, you'll get one in 2030, or you can get one in 2035. It's not going to happen as a car, particularly, a passenger vehicle. That's nothing to do with the government, though. That's challenges with technology. So, how do we make these deadlines a reality? Well, what we're talking about there is mass adoption of electric vehicles. And in order to get mass adoption of electric vehicles, we need to overcome the barriers. In my view, and in PodPoint's view, we believe there are 5 effective barriers. The first is range. How far can you go on a single charge in an electric car? Typically, the first question you get asked if you work in charging infrastructure. I can tell you now this is a solved problem. If you can drive 250 miles in all conditions, real-world conditions, that's enough. That's 5 hours of driving, and you need to stop. Okay? You need to stop for biological reasons. And you'll probably stop for about 20 minutes, and you can put another 200 miles into your car, and away you go. Now, we're going to have an arms race for range that's going to see cars do 500 miles, but I think actually the future of this is batteries will get smaller as you realize you don't need that much battery in due course. Okay? But range, solved. Next, BEV choice. BEV is full battery electric vehicle, by the way. A lot of acronyms here, I'm afraid. Are there enough types of electric vehicle out there at the moment? And the answer to that is no. The other issue we have is the time it takes to deliver a new EV. Some manufacturers are extremely slow, so that needs to improve. Now, it will. Only in the last week, we've seen really exciting announcements from BMW, Mercedes, etc. They're taking this very, very seriously. The money is going to the transition. And if our conventional OEMs don't do this, there are a lot of Chinese OEMs who are very, very happy to do it. Okay, we're starting to get a foothold. MG, for example, is doing very well in the UK. So that will be fixed. It's not today. Then we have education and perception, and this is a big one. There's a lot of factors to this. One of those factors is people think EVs are a bit crap. I've got a slide coming up in a minute which might hopefully change your mind on that. But there's a lot of people think it's not for me, okay, and we need to work on that. It's an ongoing process. Then we have cost. 2 factors on cost. We've seen electricity price go up. I'll talk about that later in the presentation, but it's the upfront cost for electric vehicles is still higher, and I'll come onto a slide as to why and why that's changing fast, and then a bit of charging and charging infrastructure. Right, so back to education and perception. A lot of people say, oh, I like my V8, I want a really powerful, fast car. So just a bit of a silly thing, we've got a drag race between two Alfa 4Cs, very old video this now, it's about 2017 I think. Alfa 4C, it's a little Italian supercar, does 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds. We can make an Alfa 4C move faster when towed by an electric people carrier than its own engine can make it move. EVs dominate petrol in terms of performance. I mean, it's not even a contest. Now, it becomes a contest once we have endurance in there as well. So a wonderful presentation from Formula E's boss who was asked, oh, can you make your cars go as fast as Formula 1 cars? I can make my cars go way faster than Formula 1 cars, but we'll only have a 20-minute race. Okay, so on the track, the petrol is still winning on endurance, but in straight-line performance, you are just not going to touch the sides with a petrol car. Right, we're talking about cost. And this, to me, is probably the most important thing. EVs are expensive to buy up front, and the reason for that is the battery. You've got about 100 times fewer moving parts in an electric vehicle drivetrain versus an internal combustion engine drivetrain. The reason it's expensive is the battery. What I've got here is a graph from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, who track the cost to manufacture batteries every year. In 2010, it was about $1,000 a kilowatt hour. Okay, that was very high. By 2021, we got it down to 141. That is staggering progress in 11 years. You will notice actually the rate of progress has slowed and creeped up last year. It actually got more expensive to manufacture batteries last year. I'll talk about headwinds in a minute as to why that is. Bloomberg are still projecting that we're going to go back and start reducing these costs, and we're going to get down to about $100 per kilowatt hour by 2026. That's quite soon. Why is 100 interesting? That's the point at which you get equivalence in the cost to manufacture an EV versus a petrol car. That starts to really flip this equation, where EVs are seen as an expensive technology. They're going to be the cheaper technology to buy as well as run, and they are actually much better cars as well, which is quite helpful to us. Okay. Once you flip that equation, as we have done in Norway using tax means, you get very rapid uptake, and this is the kind of uptake we were looking for. We have to admit we've seen a bit of a stall on this in terms of EV uptake in the last few years, particularly post-pandemic. So we've got a bit of a knee in our exponential. Now, no one knows how long that phase is. We're starting to see a little bit of pickup, actually, in the last couple of months, so hopefully we're on our way. But what it means is on the other side of that, we need to have an even stronger or even sharper recovery, which is intimidating if you work for a firm that puts the charging points in, particularly if you're in our operations team. But that's the aim. Cool, so just a bit of a recap here. Range solved, EV choice is being solved. Education and perception, we've got to keep working on. Charging is a key part of that. Cost is being solved and being solved fast. And charging, haven't covered that, have I? But I know a little bit about charging, I like to think. So it's what we like to do. I always say the first question you get asked is how far do they go? Second question is how long does it take to charge? Kind of the wrong question. If you were to get into EV charging, the first thing you're likely to do, if you're going to start your firm, is try and electrify all the petrol stations. It's the most logical thing you'll go through. That is tough to do. If you look at a petrol pump, petrol and diesel are phenomenally energy-dense substances. That means they're very, very successful fuels. If you calculate the rate of energy transfer, for any physicist in the audience to know that means power, in a petrol pump, you've got tens of megawatts of power. Trying to do that in electricity is really difficult. Now, fortunately, the internal combustion engine, it's a miracle of engineering, as we saw with McLaren's presentation, but it is woefully inefficient. It wastes almost all that energy, well, the vast majority of that energy anyway. So we don't need to get tens of megawatts, but get 600-mile refuel or recharge in 2 minutes, let's say it's 5 megawatt. Any electricians in the audience will tell you that is pretty tough going, okay, for an individual outlet. That's very expensive. And while faster isn't necessarily better, something that you realize later when you start getting into EVs, it is always more expensive. So even if we did that, some gargantuan battery, 5 megawatt charging, got 600 miles in 2 minutes, it might cost you over £3,000 for the charge event, at which point you'd say, well, 20 minutes wait was all right, actually, wasn't it? Probably wasn't a good idea. Now, why are we so obsessed with charge time? It's because of the way we use a conventionally fueled vehicle. We drive it around until we deplete the fuel to almost nothing, then we look for one of these ubiquitous petrol pumps. All drivers have this idea in their mind that their car is a mobile object, okay? And that is a fundamental lie. Your car is a stationary object that very occasionally moves. Now, what you do at the moment is you have an asset you pay for 100% of the time that you use 5% of the time, and 95% of the time it is useless. If you want to refuel it, you have to interrupt the 5% of its life when you were trying to drive it somewhere to put the fuel in it. That sucks. Everyone wants to go back to it because they know it, but it sucks. The beauty of the EV is you can charge it in the 95% of its life when you weren't trying to drive it, and you don't have to wait, and it does it for you. And that is why EV works and why it is better in terms of convenience. So you move away from the electric petrol pump and towards the more pretentious charging ecosystem, which I have behind me. You think at this point, where do I need charge points? And want a charge point relatively low cost one, all the places my car spends its time doing nothing. The first place your cars like to spend a lot of time is at or near to your home. The charging ecosystem there is our forward-looking projection of a mature, steady-state market. Think 2035, 2040. We think about 60% of all charging will happen at home. Today, it's about 80%, much higher. The reason for that is EV drivers self-select as the people who can home charge in the early market, okay? But in the fullness of time, the likes of me, who can't home charge, come to market, that comes down still 60%. 0% of refueling, 60% of recharging happens at home. They're different, okay? Next place cars spend a lot of time is at work. Outside of London, the car is the dominant commuting mode in the UK. About 70% of commuting is done by car. Great opportunity for charging cars. I split it into 3 categories. People who live the dream, who can charge at home and or work. People who can't charge at home, we'll come on to those in a second. Workplace charging is a really important backbone charger for them. And the third category is fleet and depot applications, okay? 30% of charging we think that makes up, okay? So between those two, home and work, that's 90% of charging. To a rounding error, that's all of it, right? Of course, we still have the public network to come on to. But if I take to the streets, harass plebs, and I ask, are there enough chargers to convert the UK's cars to electric vehicles? The answer to that would be no, and they'd be right. Okay, it'd be mad to have 30 million cars worth of chargers at the minute. But it's because when they go to a petrol station, there's one that says petrol, one says diesel, and there isn't one that says electric. But that is not where charging happens. It's discrete sockets on the walls of your homes and your work. There is also the public network. I have neither home nor work charging. Your mileage may vary. I do 100% of my charging on the public network. We split that between destination. Destination is charging somewhere you were going to go anyway, right? So it doesn't deter you or take you away from your lifestyle. Great example of this, we've got a lot of chargers at Tesco. Now, you may choose to shop at Tesco because they'll charge your car for you, or will charge your car for you while you're there, but you're going to Tesco to shop. It's a secondary background activity in your life, okay? It could be a range of powers, but if you put them in the convenient locations, they get used. The final category is en route charging, high-powered charging, much more like refueling a car, and that's where we're drawn in a petrol car. We want to know about these really high-powered chargers. I've got it on my slide here at 3%, which you may think I'm telling you it's unimportant, and I'm absolutely not saying that. The optical importance of en route charging is massive because we buy a car to do 100% of our journeys, and if you don't have a good en route charging network, you can only go half the range of your car. So you've got to get there, and you've got to get back. With a decent en route charging network, you can go anywhere you want, whenever you want to, as you do in a conventional vehicle. So why is it only 3% if it's so important? Just ask yourself, if you drive a petrol car, if the ferries came overnight and gave you 250 miles of petrol, and they came at your work and gave you 250 miles of petrol, and every time you got back to your car, there was 250 miles of petrol in it, when are you going to need a petrol station? And so, only on those 2 or 3 really long journeys I do a year. Ta-da! That's why you really find you don't use that stuff anywhere near as much as you might expect when you come out of a petrol car. And I am pretentious, and I have named the McKemey rapid charge paradox. And the McKemey rapid charge paradox is, the faster the charger, the longer you spend waiting. This is the most expensive and inconvenient way to charge your car. All the rest of the charging ecosystem, you're doing something else and living your life. It is the en route chargers where you're tethered to and watching them, okay? So you try and minimize it. Right, obvious question, what do I do if I can't charge at home? Particularly with the lens of the 2030, okay? If we're going to, we need to get everyone driving electric vehicles, how are we going to charge people? Look at the stats first. According to PwC research in 2018, 72% of drivers in the UK have access to off-street parking at home. That's a lot. We need to get to 20 to 30% uptake in 2030. You will see we can do that pretty easily with the low-hanging fruit. But what else do we do? What if you can't charge at home? Look for alternative chargers. So workplace is golden, incredibly convenient, as convenient as home, really. If you can't do that, again, like me, start looking at destinations. So I just try and charge where I park and park where I charge. We're creatures of habit. We tend to go to the same places, and you start to learn where the chargers are. Okay, that works pretty well. In the fullness of time, well, you can use en route charging as well. I've just told you it's expensive and inconvenient, but you can drive and watch your car charge at a high-powered charger. That does work if you're in need. In the fullness of time, we may put a lot of on-street charging infrastructure out there. At the moment, there's not a lot of it. We've got a few things like lamppost chargers, etc. But once a car is kind of electric by default, that might become viable. And finally, Elon Musk, for example, and others love autonomous features and the idea that you might be able to send your car somewhere to charge. If I ask Elon, it will be here on Tuesday. If I ask other people, they'll say it will never come, but that may well be a big factor. Okay, right. Current headwinds. I told you we're having a few challenges because progress is rarely linear. Some of the challenges to 2030. So supply chain struggles have caused a couple of issues. It has slowed battery electric vehicle manufacture, and lead times got brutal, like over a year. They need to tell us there's not enough charging infrastructure. We can install a charge point in 5 days. It takes 14 months for your car to arrive. Charging infrastructure is not the problem. Okay. It's also caused the cost reduction in batteries, as we saw on the other one, which has kept us as a more expensive vehicle. It's been more challenging. Electricity costs, you might have noticed this, it's been in the news a bit. Electricity got really, really expensive, and that has reduced the economic case of the electric vehicle. It's weakened it. The other issue from a charging infrastructure side is a lot of people used to put in charging points as a loss leader, effectively. Come use my site, and we'll make the electricity free. People are terrified of that now. Because the electricity costs are so high, and they want to take a different approach, which ends up being more expensive for drivers. You may have noticed there's a bit of anti-EV campaigning. Now, EVs have been controversial for a while. They're a new technology, and there is an inherent conservatism in us as we grow old. And new technologies we like to think are silly, and people pursuing them are daft, and they should do it the way we used to do it. Now, I understand that. I'm getting old myself. Okay, it's perfectly reasonable. This has gone a bit beyond that. We're starting to see unhinged articles, I'll name it, in the Daily Telegraph. And it's got a bit of a snowball behind it, so it's becoming a political football. That is not somewhere we want to be. We're a better car, that's it. Right, that's all we're interested in. We're not interested in being on GB News. We want that to move on in due course. Finally, I talked about on-route charging infrastructure. That is the part of the infrastructure at the moment which is struggling a little bit. There is a pinch there. It is better than the news would have you believe, but there's still an advantage in buying a Tesla and getting their supercharger network. We need to improve that as we move forward, and particularly as we move to mass market. And combined, we are actually seeing a little bit of slowing interest on some of the metrics, particularly Auto Trader are ringing alarm bells. Now, we had a really good August. We were over 1 in 5 vehicles were full battery electric. So promising there, but that might be a lagging indicator versus Auto Trader. So one to watch. With that in mind, what have we got the government doing? Okay, what do you need them to do? A lot of their policy was been set from about 2020, pre-pandemic. So things like we've pulled all the plug-in vehicle grants apart from niche applications, wheelchair accessible vehicles, vans, mopeds, blah, blah, blah. Is that the right approach? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's something we need to review as we go through sort of 2025. We have fiscal incentives. The most potent incentive out there at the moment is the low company car benefit in kind tax. Okay, that is a very, very powerful thing. That's how I get my EV. It makes a new car very cheap for you on a salary sacrifice deal. Look into it if your company's got a car scheme. That's about 2% at the moment. It goes up to 5% in 2028. I want to have a look at that. Is that getting a little bit too sharp? Don't know. There's enhanced capital allowances for putting charge points at your work. There's zero vehicle excise duty, so road tax out to 2025, but then that ends. Do we want to do that now, or do we want to extend it? Don't know. And the 0% benefit in kind electricity at work, no date on that changing. On the infrastructure side, we pulled all the home charging grants, which was quite a successful grant. It's only there for flats, communal areas, slightly more niche applications. There is a workplace charging scheme grant, which is very useful and very well used. Ends in April. Might want to look at extending that. And there's an on-street residential charging scheme. On-street charging has never done too well, and nor has that grant. Now, upcoming government schemes. So the first one here is the really, really critical one at the moment. That's the zero-emission vehicle mandate. 2030 and 35 are radical policies. Okay, they are quite strong interventions. The zero-emission vehicle mandate is essentially the flight path to get OEMs, so vehicle manufacturers, to the 2030 date. And it's really soft by comparison. Okay, so it's supposed to come in 2024. 22% of sales should be full battery electric. And if you can't do that, you buy credits, or actually, for the first 2 years, you don't actually have to make an EV until 2026. It is incredibly loose. But this has been blocked by, I won't name them, a particular government minister. And as far as we can see, really because they think they're going to lose the next election, and this is going to be one of the parts of their campaigning, right? This is not a fun place to be when you become a political football. That's a really important policy. And the funny thing is, the people in the firing line for this, the car manufacturers, are screaming at the government, you have to make this happen. which is kind of an interesting position from where we are. Next up, the Rapid Charging Fund. That's nearly £1 billion of subsidy for doing grid upgrades for motorway service area charging, en route charging, etc. That's run into the weeds a bit. That needs to get moving. That's got some issues on competition, and we need to get that far into the 2020s. But I believe we will. There's a local electric vehicle infrastructure fund. The thing I'm really excited about that is half the fund is for capability, half of it's capital. It's the capability bit I like. So they're going to put people in local authorities to consider if there is enough charging infrastructure in those areas. Because at the minute, one of the problems with the previous scheme is it's no one's job. You try and sell them charging infrastructure, you're talking to the guy on the desk, and you're like, well, who do you want me to put you through to? Right, there's no one there. There are also the public charge point regs, so that's just basically making us up our game as an industry in terms of accessibility and reliability, etc. And one that came in last year, every parking bay associated with a new build dwelling has to have a charging point, an active charging point put in it, and that's been a very successful way of getting a lot of charging infrastructure out there, so good work from the government. So taking that all in mind, looking at the various headwinds, looking at the momentum of the industry, do I still believe that 2030 is achievable? Yes, I do. I think we should stick with that. We should pursue it. It's definitely doable, and it's definitely commendable. Any questions? Hello, sir. Do we do a mic thing, or we?
Yeah, just speak very loudly, please.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Hi, James. My name's Kevin. I'm an EV driver. Yeah.
I can tell.
Given, absolutely. One thing that I don't think you mentioned, which I think is growing and it's causing me concern, is the reliability of chargers. As you say, we're all creatures of habit. I've got 3 chargers near me. I go around each one. I look on ZapMap, which is the Bible. All 3 are currently broken, have been broken for the last 6 weeks. You ring the manufacturers, yeah, we know. How do you factor that into it? And obviously Pod Point is probably not in the same position. They're not Pod Point chargers, fortunately. Anyway.
Well, that's the error there, isn't it?
Which is good. But where does that factor into things?
Yeah, making pod points, mate, be fine. No, public charge point regs, we've got very, very stringent reliability measures coming in through that. Okay, so that should change. There's some historic issues where people have put stuff in and then not continued their warranties or maintenance agreements, etc., which is a real challenge. Yeah, I know I'm the same. I know charge points which let me down. There are pod points too, but those are quite stringent. It's 99% uptime, okay, and we're working through what that means. But that's quite a powerful piece of legislation, I think, the public charge point regs. You can look into that if you like. There's quite a lot in it.
Will there be penalties for not maintaining that then?
Yeah, it's been determined. It's OPSS will enforce it. Yeah. So there you go. It's on its way. It's laid in Parliament. It should be live about November. Most of the things, the reliability, I think, bites in a year. So we got. It's coming though. It is definitely coming. And
will that have an impact?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff in there, and our dev roadmap. I'm having to get our company to do that while they do other stuff. It's tough stuff. That's a serious policy. But well done for being such a wise and judicious chap.
I'm going to have to jump in there. If anyone has any further questions for James, maybe are you around after this session? People,
I certainly can be.
Absolutely. If James is around, and obviously you can send him an email or connect with him on LinkedIn as well.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, James.
Awesome.
Thanks
very much. Cheers. Bye.